This is Al McGee with YETicket.com. Last Will and Testament. Well, this is a great documentary that I really enjoyed. And these two filmmakers, the directors and producers, Lisa Wilson and Laura Wilson Matthias, they're here to talk about the film. Good afternoon, young ladies.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having us. Great to be here.
Well, Lisa, let me ask you this first question.
Yeah.
What do you like about Shakespeare?
Oh gosh, he tells us, he shares with us so much about ourselves, and it transcends any particular period of time, and you never come to the end of him. Especially the plays and the sonnets just take you deeper and deeper every time you engage with them. They're so real and alive. I think is it's a well that you keep dipping back into over and over and over again.
Is that how you feel, Laura?
Yeah, I do. He gave us the modern human before modern times. So he kind of gave us a roadmap and was able to articulate so much of what it means to be human, every side of the conflict at Huron in form. And yeah, like Lisa said, you really don't come to the end. And he also had a sense of humor, which is always good, and engaged us in some more important questions. I think his authorship is one of those. And that's what prompted this film and the passion behind the film.
Yeah, your film is Last Will and Testament, and it's really about, was Shakespeare real? Did he really write those plays and things like that? Why did you want to try to answer that question, Laura?
Not so much answer. Well, answer is part of it. I think legitimizing the question, there's a heated debate as to who the true author was. Was it William Shakespeare from Stratford, or was it someone else? I think there's been a continuous sort of dissatisfaction with the works and what we know about the man. There's this major disconnect between the facts, very few facts behind the Stratford man's life and the work. So I think, it kind of set into motion a really deep sort of dissatisfaction, and then also trying to solve that. So, solving is part of it, but also just legitimizing the question. It's a legitimate question to ask, to highlight that there's been great minds, a continuous intellectual stream of giants who have questioned this, and it's okay to question it. Not only is it okay, but it's important to actually go in search of the author.
Well, that's great. But Lisa, in your documentary, many people testified that Shakespeare did not have anything handwritten, his plays, manuscripts, anything like that. You want to talk about that a little bit, Lisa?
Yeah, that is the tricky part. We know a lot about William Shakespeare, but none of it's literary. So it's that literary paper trail that leaves one wanting when it comes to, because you engage with the works and you see the depth and the breadth of the knowledge and the experience, but then you go back to the life of the Stratford man and it's just not there in terms of that literary creativity. That's what's missing.
Yeah, that's what's missing, because that's why many people are still asking those questions about William Shakespeare. Now, Laura, Elizabeth I was a big fan of William Shakespeare. Can you talk about that a little bit more?
Yeah, if you understand the period, the public playhouse was just forming. And I do think that most of these plays started, she loved theater. She was extremely well educated. She loved poetry. She was a poet herself. And I think that she really wanted to bring England into the Renaissance that had been going on the continent for 200 years or 100 to 200 years. So I think without her support, the Elizabethan age, and especially Shakespeare, could not have happened. One without the other, I don't think would have happened. They're important soulmates, I think. And understanding that relationship is at the core of authorship too, I think. So the Stratford man's connection, Shakespeare from Stratford's connection to the Queen, also set into motion this sort of disconnect that I think has prompted people to take a really hard look at the authorship question and why it's gaining momentum.
Yeah, because at that time too, the Puritans, they didn't like plays. They didn't like the people to write like that and things like that. They had a lot to go against writings and plays because of the Puritans. And I feel Elizabeth I, she did a lot to promote that. And we wouldn't have the great theater we have today because of that. Now, Laura, they're Jacoby and Mark Rylance. Did you actually talk to them yourself to get them to be interviewed for your documentary?
Lisa and I, my sister Lisa and I have been documenting the authorship question for 2+ decades. And so we've interviewed all the pioneers on all sides of the argument. And then also have had the wonderful opportunity to get to know some of these great Elizabethan actors, or not Elizabethan actors, but Shakespeare, the best of the Shakespeare sort of actors of our generation. And so, yeah, we sat down with them. They were generous beyond belief to this film and donated their time and energy. Sir Derek Jacobi is a huge proponent of the Oxfordian case. Mark Rylance has been a champion for the authorship cause for decades, putting himself and his reputation on the line. So yeah, and Vanessa Redgrave, we were truly fortunate, weren't we, Lisa, to get the giants to come on board, and it was quite easy.
Yeah. And Lisa, let me ask you about Stanley Wells. Tell us who he is.
At the time, I believe he was chairman of the Birthplace Trust. Is that correct, Laura?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's honorary chairman at this time. Yeah.
Yeah, so he's really the face behind really the Stratford man, the Shakespeare of Stratford, the William Shakespeare of Stratford, we call him, and the Birthplace Trust, and that whole industry that is Stratford upon Avon.
Wow. Yeah, that guy, he seemed to be very knowledgeable about Shakespeare and birthplace and everything like that. But my question also to you, Lisa, is this: who really benefits about Shakespeare? Who really gather anything from Shakespeare? Who really benefits about Shakespeare?
The Stratford man?
Yeah.
Well, certainly the industry. Stratford upon Avon is a million, one could argue, billion-dollar industry. The tourism there, people, the pilgrimage, the homage, they pay him there.
Yeah, I think I'm going to step in here because obviously it's the tourism industry, but I think there's a lot of tenure academic professors who have written. He's one of the most written about authors of all time. And so there's the academy or academia has a tremendous amount vested in the traditional story of Shakespeare, which has, I think, been part of why there hasn't been as much progress in the authorship question, although it's gained tremendous momentum now because people are looking elsewhere. The cult of the authority that is academe with regards to Shakespeare is diminishing because they're just rehashing the same story without the evidence. So I think that was also at the core of our film and the passion behind why we wanted to do the film.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. And really the biographies that come out every year, that roll off the presses, it really is academia, I think, that benefited the most. But like I said, we're in a whole different paradigm now because of the Shakespeare authorship question. People aren't buying it anymore. And if academia won't look at it, so be it. As we say at the end of the film, viewers, Shakespeare lovers will look elsewhere. If academia won't take a look at the question, they'll find other avenues to explore.
Well, let me give you a little story about myself and Shakespeare. I was a senior and I was in 11th grade in high school, and I went to summer school so I can try to graduate earlier, and I took an English course. And so this professor came in, or teacher came in, and he assigned us to read Shakespeare. Oh, we all have really difficult times reading Shakespeare. He said, I'm glad you're having a difficult time, because he said Shakespeare is not to be read, it's to be acted. So he got a bunch of us to take different parts of the play, which was Macbeth, and act it out, in front of the class and read it as the character. And that's really got my strong, let's say, knowledgeable belief into Shakespeare. And then I became a college professor, and I always taught Shakespeare either in my drama class or in my humanities class that I taught, or even in my speech classes. I taught something about Shakespeare And I always loved Shakespeare. And one of my favorite plays is Macbeth. I love Macbeth. I really love that play by him, even though I
You
love
know,
Richard III too.
well, when I was introduced to it in school, yeah, I struggled. And it wasn't until, I mean, we've all experienced the elephant in the room. And it wasn't until I started acting Shakespeare in college that I started to sense the elephant in the room, which is that authorship question. And you're really not going to get that until you get out there and you really start speaking the lines and you start interacting with these actors, looking them in the eyes. And that's when I started to sense the subterfuge, the authorship question embedded in the works itself. It was like the elephant in the room for me when I started. It wasn't until I started acting it that it really came alive. So
Well,
I'm
you
right
know,
there with you.
yeah, but I never questioned who wrote this or who he was. I never did, but until much, much later in my life, I started reading articles about people saying, well, he really didn't exist. He really didn't write this. This is made up. Many different people wrote these and just put his name on there. Again, when I was younger, the thought of him not being him never came into my psyche of my life at all. And none of my students never said, is this really Shakespeare?
So now that you know there's an authorship question, or now that you've acted Shakespeare and you've experienced Shakespeare, do you think it matters who the author was?
For me, no, because you really don't, I don't have any proof that it's not him. I don't have any proof it's not him. But according to your documentary, there's this guy named Edward de Vere. He was the Earl of Oxford, and he supposedly now, according to your documentary, maybe he wrote those plays. Tell us about that.
Well,
He's
certainly the leading candidate right now. I mean, it started out with Francis Bacon and kind of migrated over. I mean, we knew the chances are the author was probably at the court of Queen Elizabeth, had to be well educated, had to travel, and that's when Oxford's discovered in 1920 by J. Thomas Loney.
Yeah, and you really talk a lot about him. But also, well, Shakespeare supposedly died in 1616, but they really didn't get anything really published about him until 1623, according to your documentary, and that was by Ben Jonson. He wrote poems of Shakespeare and things like that. Tell us a little bit about how Ben Jonson contributed to, well, spreading the name of Shakespeare.
Yeah, that's pretty much ground zero for authorship. So 1616, the man from Stratford dies, and in 1623 is the first time all of his plays are published. Nearly half had never been published before in his lifetime. So this was a big deal. This was an expensive project, and Ben Jonson was probably hired to edit this by the Pembrokes, to whom the folio is dedicated. And I think that if you read the introductory poem and look at the Droeshoot engraving, which is our first image, the one you have behind you, is our first image of the man. Again, this is a posthumous image. This is well after the Stratford man has died. So this is the first time there's a sort of collating of all the plays in one massive, expensive publication at a very specific time in history when there was a pro-Tudor movement, and Shakespeare was a Tudor propagandist. And so Ben Jonson gave these image and a couple of poems to the beginning of the folio, of which he kind of tips his hat to anyone who's going to read this. Listen, there's an authorship question. This is a mask. Don't look at this picture. Look at the works, and you're going to learn a lot more about this Elizabethan age and the author than you might expect. So Ben Jonson, I think, was part of the fix, and I think he's a core part of the story. And the film, takes a pretty good look at that.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that part, and it was very knowledgeable. Also, what I really, you showed us in the film that there was only 6 examples of Shakespeare's signatures. Also, man, I really found that very fascinating. But they all seem to be a little bit different.
They are. They're very, as Diana Price says, they're very crabbed. It doesn't look like he's formed an elegant John Hancock, so to speak. And that is, again, it speaks to the lack of literary paper trail. I mean, all we have are these 6 signatures, all spelled differently, all on legal documents, nothing literary. No poems, no memos, no letters. This was the most prolific, probably, writer of all time. To say that we have nothing in terms of any kind of literary paper trail speaks volumes of silence, as our film says.
Yeah. I mean, I feel people should really watch this. And I saw this documentary years ago because I'm part of two critics organization. Of course, we got the DVD back in 2012, around that time. Because we have to, we vote on what we think. And when I started watching it last week, I said, wait a minute, I saw this before. And then I looked at it again. Yeah, it reminded me that I did see this before. But unfortunately, I had no one to discuss this with. Because all my other friends, they're only into movies. They're not into the question of who is Shakespeare, or did he write his plays? And that's the unfortunate thing for me, that I didn't have anyone to discuss that with. Just one more question about this. Now, Strike Back is reissuing your film, and that's a good thing, because it needs to be seen. And now it's going to be on video on demand and things like that. What do you think about Strike Back reissuing your film?
Oh, we couldn't be more thrilled. And Noor and his company have a great model for getting these new these releases out there. Last Will and Testament, when it first came out, was that big transition that we all know. The internet was changing the world, and VOD was changing the world, and I think it got caught in the shuffle. But in a way, it was a blessing. You always have to look for that silver linings, as Shakespeare would say, is because we're at 2020 was the 100-year anniversary of discovery of Edward de Vere, the 17th Earl of Oxford, as the potential author. So we have that 100-year anniversary. And 2024 is the 400th anniversary of the death of Henry Wriothesley, the 3rd Earl of Southampton, who was the only person to whom Shakespeare ever dedicated anything. So now the timing is actually quite good for this title to come out, and we're thrilled about it. And we know we're not to say that the 2012 release international attention. It won some awards at the Sedona Film Festival and the Austin Film Festival. So it did get its recognition, but we're just absolutely thrilled that it's going to get a much broader distribution at this point.
Anything else you like to say about that, Lisa? I'm sorry, Laura.
No, you had it right, Lisa.
No, you had it right.
Lisa.
No, that independent film, for us, it's always about the content, the scholars. As you see, the script was entirely constructed off of our interview. So supporting those scholars, those brave doubters out there, and then to put a nod to indie film is just Strike Back Studios and giving it another round out in the marketplace is absolutely fantastic. And just to circle back on the Earl of Oxford versus the Stratford man, and I'm not taking a position necessarily with it, but when you look at Hamlet and you look at the play and then you look at Oxford's life, it was just so compelling. That's what brought us forward. And you compare that with the Stratford man's life, there's just no dynamic current there. So if this independent film and its re-release gets people looking at candidates primarily at the court of Queen Elizabeth, I think is going to yield some really exciting discoveries.
Yes, it should and it will. And I really enjoyed it again. And like I said, I'm a big Shakespeare fan, and I've been teaching it, I've been reading it, I've been acting in it, and I'm glad to see this again. Well, thank you very much, Lisa and Laura, for joining me, Al McGee at yeticket.com. Much success to your film. And are you going to do anything else? You got any other documentaries on mind, anything like that you're going to do?
Yeah, go ahead, Lisa.
Part 3 of the film kind of shifts into that political dynastic elements of the authorship question. It's just that final layer that came out of the Essex Rebellion in 1603. And then, obviously Queen Elizabeth, or 1601, and then Queen Elizabeth dies in 1603. Oxford dies in 1604, and then you got this groundswell up to 1623 when the first folio is released. So chances are we're going to dip our toe back into that political and dynastic content.
Yeah, people really love those times. People really love seeing movies about them, reading about it, and this will be a great thing because people really love those times to go back and look at it and to learn. That's the whole thing, to learn.
Yeah, Laura, did you want to say something about the third Earl again with those?
Yeah, you know, I always, yeah, thank you, Lisa. I always circle back to Henry Risley, the third Earl, again, the only person Shakespeare ever dedicated to, probably the fair youth of the sonnets. This is an important figure at the crossroads of authorship. So we've been taking a hard look at him the last 20 years, and he's definitely going to be part of our next project. We're also conserving and preserving his final resting place in a small church in England. So we've been behind that conservation restoration effort to bring his final resting place to a broader audience. And by 2024, again, the 400th anniversary of his interment. So Shakespeare and his patron and or friend and or I don't know, Henry Risley, 3rd Earl of Southampton, is definitely part of our next project.
Oh, well, much success to you for that. And again, thank you very much for joining me on the year at yuticket.com. I want to thank you very much, and I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Albert. Really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you. You're welcome.
This is your entertainment ticket. Latest and greatest.